All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So we're looking at the notes for 3.3, and that's threats to biodiversity. So this is just some of the information from the IB guide, so we're clearly not covering all of it right now. But this is just an introduction. So I did have people on ManageBack, it says to take out that note catcher. I really love that note catcher because it outlines everything you're supposed to know from the IB guide. And then it asks you just to fill in the information. So I want you to fill in facts and everything you know about each of those categories as you move through the note catcher, and put as much as you can. It's okay if we can't put that much about each bulleted or listed item, because we can go back and fill them in when we know more. So first off, the significant idea of 3.3 says, while global biodiversity is difficult to quantify, so to measure, it is decreasing rapidly due to human activity. Classification of species conservation status can provide a useful tool in the conservation of biodiversity. So this is really the two parts. So we're looking at some threats to biodiversity and then how that relates to conservation efforts, especially if you glance down here to species that are on this red list. So this is all the background information. Those people who are here in class, I might just ask you to skip ahead until to where we left off. So world biodiversity. No one knows the exact number of species on Earth. Estimates range between 5 and 50 million. That's a huge, huge, huge difference. Huge difference. So conservatively, some people say about 7 million species on Earth. So 50 million is obviously way, way, way greater than that, but we're not totally sure. So no one knows exactly what's out there, but we do believe that about 2/3 of the species that do exist live in the tropics, so specifically the tropical rainforests. Just to jog your memory here, the tropics zone is between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn, just surrounding the equator. So I asked people in class just to list a few of the characteristics of this zone that help support a lot of living things. People listed, high precipitation, high year-round temperatures, and also consider things like high solar insolation. So they get a lot of sunlight there for photosynthesis as well. Okay, so this area has a lot of productivity. Then I we all know the story about the tropical rainforest. We all see the campaigns. We all see the advertisements. We've all heard about it on TV. Um, I've even seen people walking around Boulder, which is extremely far. So Boulder, Colorado, extremely far from the tropical rainforest, getting people to sign and donate money to save these forests that seem like they're half a world away. So I want you to think about the reality of the situation. In reality, about half of all the tropical rainforests have already been destroyed by humans. Every 5 to 10 years, they say, people destroy another 1 million square kilometers of the tropical rainforest. And that's by clearing it, just bulldozing it, burning it, and logging it. So cutting down those trees. And many countries that once had tropical rainforests no longer have the primary forests. So primary forests would mean that they have not been disturbed by human activity. Instead, they have these secondary forests. So secondary forests, if you're thinking along the lines of succession, secondary forests are forests that have regrown, okay, after some sort of human disturbance. So here we see these images. I mean, you have to think about there's this balance because the people who live in the tropics, they need to meet their needs as well. So they might be clearing space for, maybe human developments, urbanization. They might be logging because the lumber is worth money. Okay, and they can use that for their economies. They might even be clearing land because they want to raise cattle, and in order to have cattle, we don't let them wander through the rainforest. They need to have an open field and some grass. So they might clear these areas for agricultural purposes as well, not to mention to grow things, perhaps to grow certain crops that they want in the area. So now looking at extinction rates. So this graph is just showing extinctions and human population as for the relationship. So we see this direct correlation. So as one increases, the other increases. So if as the human population increases, the number of extinctions also increases. And this is a big concern because we have a huge growing human population. So human activity is what we believe is primarily responsible for a lot of the problems that the other species are encountering on Earth. So scientists believe that 100 species of every or of every million species that exist are going extinct each year. Now this is 100 to 10,000 times the normal background extinction rate. So it is sped up by many, many, many times. Okay, so that's a huge, huge increase. Not to mention that if you're thinking about those hotspots after our projects, the hotspots are hit harder than other areas. So those ecosystems that are unique, they have all of these endemic species, they are experiencing they tend to be rather fragile and are experiencing a lot of damage, and that's one of the reasons why people are trying to put the effort and the money into conserving those hotspots, and hopefully that will have a positive impact in those areas as well. So why are species, going extinct so quickly? So I want you just to pause, think about it. What are a couple reasons associated with human activity that you can think of? And then we're going to go through a list of, I think, 7, if I remember how many I put on there. So one, we kind of already discussed. So habitat loss. So people cutting down the tropical rainforest is an example. So we're clearing the land for agriculture, for urbanization, and that means that, there's no plants and there's no area to support animal life there as well. Then there's this. So I'm going to actually show, for most of them, show images first, and then we're going to try and figure out what it means. So this image shows, this image, the map, is actually Colorado. So this is up in the mountains in Colorado. So these green areas are natural, forested areas, and everything in between has been somehow disturbed by people, and you can see there's different. These are actually nice. These are nice locations to visit. Vail, Breckenridge are big ski communities. If ever you find yourself in Colorado, Aspen, right? So these are great places to go skiing if you're interested. But we see these green patches. Okay, we can imagine at one point this would have been all green. And then we're trying to compare it to this. So I see forest here on one side of the road. Okay, some land that's been kind of cleared and there's just grass there. A road and then some grass again and then the forest. So what we're really trying to refer to is something called habitat fragmentation. So that's when the areas of land have been broken apart into these separate chunks or separate pieces of land, so it's fragmented. Okay? And those zones are not connected. So if you're, let's just say a deer living over here, it's going to be pretty hard for you to cross. Okay, so this is actually road. These are roads, some of them. So this is a big main road. It's going to be really hard for you to cross and get from here all the way over to here, okay, to find food or to find a mate or anything else. So this is habitat fragmentation, which causes a big problem. Then here are images, so you can guess what it is. So here we go, pollution. So we know this is the case. So pollution destroys the atmosphere, it destroys the water, it destroys the soils, it decreases their quality. Then we've also talked about things like biomagnification, when pollutants build up within the tissues of organisms and then are passed and magnified, so they increase in those higher trophic levels, which can be extremely damaging. Not to mention that atmospheric pollution is a major cause of climate change. Okay. So this is very specific, so you can take a look at this. We debated what type of fish this was. I believe, though I'm not a fish expert, that this to me looks like a red snapper. Okay, so this is fishing for red snapper. So you would just take a look at the huge quantities that they're piling up on the boat here. So when we showed this picture, a lot of people said overfishing, which is accurate. So we're looking at overexploitation. Overexploitation, I did miss a parenthesis here, a parenthesis right there. But overexploitation in general, we're talking about the overharvesting of organisms in particular, but also other things. Like we overharvest topsoils and fossil fuels. We overexploit them. We use them at a faster rate than they can be replaced. So we use them unsustainably. And that is a huge reason why things are disappearing because we're taking them out of the environment. And overfishing, we'll see soon, is a huge, huge, huge problem that is really, really impacted a lot of the marine populations. Then this, some people had lots of questions about this. These are those birds that we actually see flying around Rome. So I'm not sure. Some people are calling them parakeets. So I've heard them be called the parakeets of Rome. Though they look rather big to me, so I'm surprised that we call it a parakeet, not a parrot. But I'm not going to argue there. This is that cane toad from Australia. They're quite big actually, and it's eating a snake actually. So it caught a snake and is consuming one of the native snakes in Australia. On the other hand, this is in Florida. So this guy looks like some sort of, I don't know if he's like a park ranger or something, but he is holding the tail of a Burmese python. So Burmese pythons were released in Florida. They think originally that somebody had some as pets and they didn't want them anymore. So they thought, okay, we're going to release them in southern Florida and nothing will really happen. But yeah, they're coming from Asia, and Florida has a nice, hot, humid habitat, and it was highly habitable for them. It had a bunch of food sources for them, so they spread and reproduced, and now they're a huge, huge problem in the area. And I don't want to shock you, but this one isn't that big. So I even think that recently they tried to campaign where they were gonna they're gonna pay people some money for going out and killing some of them, so you could like kill five Burmese pythons and then get some money for it locally, so that you're helping to control their population. Now, this was an accident, so someone was not really thinking about that. The parakeets, I'm not really sure how they got here. They do not belong here. Maybe that was similar as a released pet population that just somehow survived the Roman climate and seems to be doing quite well. And this cane toad was intentional. So they intentionally released it as a biological control to try and control some beetle population. And that didn't work at all. And they started, eating the other organisms that live in Australia. So we have a term for these types of organisms, and that's introduced. So there's actually a lot of terms. So introduced, non-native, alien, that doesn't need an S, I could edit that, alien or exotic species. So this taking something that doesn't belong there, we're putting it in this new ecosystem. It disrupts the food web, number one, but then also they can cause a lot of other problems and destruction as well. So that can have kind of a chain reaction depending on the type of organism. Then here, if you were in class today, then you probably need to start off right here. So it says, why are species going extinct so quickly? So we have all of these things, and we're adding two more. So we just said diseases as well. So human populations actually increase the spread of disease. One is because our population is so high and fairly dense, so diseases spread fairly easily through the human population, especially viruses. And both of the ones listed here are, flu or influenza, so it's a virus. There was scares a few years ago about both the influenza and the H1N1 or bird flu, which were transferred between animals or from animals to people. And it's a big deal because people are extremely mobile. So we can go to the tip of South America and then fly the next day to Europe. And if we happen to catch a virus, then we would be spreading that virus to a whole different zone of the world, which is a great concern, especially if the virus might if in fact both animals, so non-human animals and humans. And we also mentioned modern agricultural practices like growing those monocultures that are extremely genetically similar, like the bananas and the potatoes that became diseased and then they went rampant. So things to consider there. Okay, I'm going to need to make a new video because we're running out of time. So here we go.